Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Church Digital Podcast. My name is Jeff Reed, and it is a pleasure once again to have you all join us today. We've got a great episode here. This is episode 7. We've done 7 of these things already, and time has been flying by. I'm joined today by Kevin Lee, who is the online small groups pastor over at Saddleback, just a small little church over there on the West Coast. And you may remember his name. He came up a couple times in conversation during episode 3, talking with Jay Cranda. And Jay tried to steal some of his thunder, but we saved it and we got it. So it's going to be a great episode. Hey, Kevin, man, why don't you just take a minute, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry and what it looks like over there at Saddleback.
Yeah, Jeff, glad to be here. Thanks for having me. And so my role at Saddleback is small groups pastor for our campus, which is the online campus. So just for short, I just, title myself online small groups pastor. And a lot of people think that I deal only with the online small groups. And a lot of people actually don't know what that means. So, but actually half of our groups, majority of our groups are actually meeting at home groups that meets in other states outside of our physical campus's immediate reach. And about another half of our small groups are meeting online. So I don't know if you're going to ever talk about that, or in your previous episodes you've talked about that. But so I pastor along with our volunteers and our team to help our small groups do well and be healthy.
Yeah, and I hate to slap a number on that, but you told me earlier it's like 2,400 small groups?
Yeah, right now, 2,400 small groups registered under our online campus. Yeah.
And so that's 2,400 small groups that are outside of the circle of influence of your physical campuses. So like 25, 30 miles, something like that?
Yeah, correct. So outside of our physical campus's reach, 25 miles outside, and we have 19 campuses around the world right now. So anything outside of those, campuses reach will fall under me. So if the funnel kind of goes like where if someone watches Saddleback worship service and they want to start a small group or join a small group, at first we want to see if they're connected to a local church because we want to be the advocates for the local church. And if they are, we actually recommend and suggest, hey, you should check out the small groups at your church, at your local church. And if they're, for whatever reasons, for, geographical or security or health reasons, they are not part of a local church, we help them start a online small groups or home small group with their friends and family.
That's amazing. And so all that still equals 2,400 groups that are either meeting in homes or outside of location, or via technology like a Zoom or a Skype or something like that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's it.
Wow. And that sets up perfectly what I wanted to talk about a little bit with this episode, because we're getting to this place of, and I wrote about this recently on a blog. I was writing about Judah Smith over at Church Home. Judah's up there in California as well. Yeah. And so he was getting a lot of flack, and he created this Church Home model of a mobile app to create discipleship. And it was interesting. I was reading it was USA Today, so it was a complimentary piece that I wrote on the USA Today. And like he got a lot of flack, and a lot of people were angry and upset to him. We'll link to the blog in the show notes and Judah Smith. Yeah. But like people are like, I don't know what that is, but don't call that church. And to me, I kind of stepped back and I was like, well, let's really break down, what church is and what church isn't. And so with this episode, like I want to hone in a little bit on some of the arguments of, okay, well, church online isn't this, and discuss with Kevin and just try to even talk through, well, how do we answer that? How can we solve some of those problems? Because in my experience with church online, it's not so much what it can't be, but it's more of we don't have vision to figure out how to solve that problem, or we're not giving it a chance to. And so like in context, and just to kind of unpack here on the biblical community piece of this,
Yeah.
so often I hear you can't have biblical community online. You can't do
Mm.
small groups online. And
Yeah.
so, Kevin, when somebody says to you, man,
Mm.
you can't do small groups online like you can
Mm.
at a physical church. Like
Yeah.
you, who's managing and
Mhm.
overseeing and shepherding 2,400 groups,
Mm.
like, what's your response to that?
Wow, it's a question that I have a whole lot to say. Not because I haven't, opinions on that, but because I have so many stories of, life transformation that happened through our groups. And just what Jay and I try to do is we look at the Bible and see, hey, what are the essence of the church? What are some things that we cannot sacrifice on? And we just go and see if we can bring those essence into our online community. So just for example, you know, we all know that technology is changing the world. And I was just at the gym one other day and I saw someone just working out very hard and they had a phone in front of them. And it was it was a FaceTime and there was another person at the other side of the phone. And what they were doing, essentially, they were keeping each other accountable, training one another over the FaceTime. And I was just thinking something so individual, such as working out, is they're able to have accountability through, FaceTiming. And I just thought that was, just a small example of how technology is changing the relationships, changing the just accountability aspects. And we're just bringing that over to our church and seeing, hey, we know that relationships are important. And we know that accountability is important. And we know that community is important. And we want to bring that in whatever way to our church, to people that we minister to. And we just said, hey, you can use whatever you want to have this community and let's see where it goes. And we have some of most vibrant and deep conversations in our Skype groups, people who meet through Zoom. And we even have some people that do text groups because these people are working professionals, working moms. They have really no time that they can designate that, like a designated time to meet regularly. So they put themselves in a Slack. And these people tell me that these conversations are what gets them going.
Wow.
They literally are encouraged by the text that they get, and they try to meet, every once in a while just to be just confirm with one another that they're doing good, and just to check on themselves. But those text messages and those checkups are literally what's keeping them alive and do well in their relationship with God and relationship with other people. So there's so many different stories like this, that are doing the work of the church, right? So that are bearing the fruits of ministry to say, hey, that's not the ministry of the church. That's not church. We can't, I feel like that's discounting people's
Mhm.
story if you say that. So
Yeah.
just my
So
2 cents. Yeah.
let's unpack a little bit because this is good. So the text groups,
Yeah.
the Skype groups, the ones that are using virtual software, because there's home
Hmm.
groups, and I want to get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But the ones that are using the technology
Yeah.
as the vehicle to stay connected to communicate,
Hmm.
are the people all within the same geographical area? Like they're in the same city? Are they separated by distance? Kind of, what's the examples you have there?
So some are, some aren't. So we purposefully don't have a specific software for our groups to meet. That's because we have groups in Asia, we have groups in Europe, and they have softwares that they're familiar with. And if we say, hey, this is the only platform that you can use, we become the bottleneck of how they can meet, and we don't want to do that. There's with technology, there's a bandwidth issue. There's with different countries, there are different technological issues that that we don't want to become the limitations to. So these groups use whatever that they're comfortable with, and some groups are just like the Slack group that I talked about. They are geographically close somewhat, but not so close so that they can meet every week. But we have also some groups that are literally across the country. We have some people that meet in West Coast, some live in West Coast, and some people who live in East Coast. So they have to account for time zones and different things, but they meet like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I lead an online small group, an online Bible study. We meet every Tuesday night.
That's good. Yeah.
Within my study, I'm down here in Miami, Florida, and I've got people in the group from Miami, Florida. I've got people from Fort Lauderdale, from North Florida up in DeLand, Plant City area. I've got people up in New York. I've got people in Houston that jump on, and so it's this really, one of the things that I love about it. It's this really unique mix. You know, when I talk about like online groups, I think you can get people in a virtual conversation. You can get them together in a room, but if you tried to get them together like in a physical room and try to do the same thing, I don't think it works. Like, I'm 42. I've got people. There's a woman in the group who I was actually friends with her daughters, like growing up together. You know, and so it's like a 70-year-old person plus, and I'm not putting, you know, an age on Janice Collins. I apologize publicly. So, but you know, a 70-something, you know, I'm 40-somethings, and there's 20-somethings in there. There's single moms. There's you know, lawyer dad with working too much, and so it's like all these different types of personalities come together and growing together. And what's interesting, and like I didn't put pressure on this, and the group's only been meeting like 6-7 months now, but they've started calling themselves family. Like this wasn't me prompting or pushing them. They did that on their own, and so now it's like I wasn't able to be on recently, and I had someone else lead the group for me, and like I'm getting messages, you know, hope things are okay, missed you today, and so like there's self accountability that's grown up within this group. That's so it's so awesome, you know, and like the people who are in the group, this online group. That live in Miami, they're like a couple miles away from a physical campus, but it's a single mom who's like, I don't have the capacity to try to get my kid together and go join this thing, but I need biblical community, so let me get it online. Or it's like I said, it's a dad who's the single lawyer in his law firm, and he's getting home at work at like you know 8 o'clock at night, and then to gear up to go, you know, do a small group at a house isn't happening, but jump on a computer and do Zoom, you know, all of a sudden it opens the doors for more of this community. Tell me, like, give me one story, and because I can keep going. My mom's 70. I can
keep going too.
she leads 2 online small groups, and we're going to get her on a podcast, but and for her, like, it was a rejuvenation of her ministry life. You know, she's 70, she's retired. She's thinking, okay, it's a young kid's world. Let them kind of run with the ministry. And so she was literally like handing off her ministry responsibilities to simplify her life. And then she discovered this niche of mentoring and discipling, you know, young professionals, young girls, and the availability to just do that. And so she picked it up and ran with it. And so like one group wasn't enough. Now she's doing a second one. So anyway, I can keep going. I can brag about my mom. But Kevin, tell me one story, man. Tell me something cool.
So I mean,
online small.
I have a lot, but let me just share with you the most recent one. So at Saddleback, we do what we call quarterly planning. So we meet every quarter, and we just plan for what new thing that we want to do. So and we just plan it by week. And at the end of this planning section, we have what we call vision stories. What this is we have to write a fictional story of if all these plans go well, what kind of story are we going to be able to tell to other people? How will it make itself into a story, because we don't want to make it just a work plan. We want to be able to see the vision behind it. So my story has always been, hey, we have a person who's in 40 somethings and who's just thriving in business, don't know the Lord, just doing well on business, being recognized and acknowledged in his neighborhoods, in his corporate world and everything, kind of type A personality. And I always use, that he's in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. I just make it up, just to make it fun. And this person just goes through, coasts through life and just is really driven. But something really happens where, he starts to lose things, and that could be anything. It's just, we can just say that life happens, and it could be health related things. It can be relational related things. And he just begins to drop everything. And in the midst of this, there's a neighbor of his that hands him the Purpose-Driven Life book. Right here, we gotta throw in there something in there, and just reads the book. Gets to know that there's a online service at Saddleback, and he's heard of Saddleback Church, but he doesn't really know what it is. So he goes to our worship online and just watches it, and long story short, accepts Jesus Christ, and he wants to dive into what this means. He wants to know more about the decision that he just made. So he just reaches out to us, and he realizes that he needs to belong to a family, just like you were saying, Jeff. It's not, church is not something that you put faith in. It's a family you belong to. So he realizes, and there's some options for online small groups. So he joins the online small groups, and excuse me, and then he just gets to know all these different people who are there to love him and support him. And after all of this, he decides that, because we every now and then we say to the online small groups, hey, if there are people that are around you that you want to have home groups with, why don't you do that as well? And so he decides to do a home group. He hosts it, and then he starts to meet with his small group to worship together and to have baptism and communion, which we'll talk about. So that has been always my vision story. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to Florida, actually, in Tampa, Florida, for a conference. And I knew there was a small group out there that was meeting, and it was really growing. So I thought, hey, it was in Kissimmee, which was, I think, an hour and a half away from Tampa. So I just drove out there and said, hey, I want to come to your small group. And they were getting ready for me, and we'll worship together. And I just went without not really knowing who I'm going to meet. I knew of the host, but not the stories behind it. So I went, and I just started talking to them, and her name's Connie, and she gave me permission to share this wherever I want. And so her story reflects the vision story that I've been writing for past couple quarters. And it's just, Connie was doing really well in the business world, and something tragic happens, and she gets to a point where she cannot leave the home. So literally, online church has become her family and her church. Mm-hmm. And she went to online small groups. She joined another online small group. She began to host a home group. And then in the midst of all of this, she, gets baptized. And so I visited her, and we're talking about it. And I had a this is my new life t-shirt. This is the baptism t-shirt that we do on our baptisms, and I just brought it, and I thought there may be someone that I need to baptize in this trip. I just brought it, and she saw the shirt, and she said, hey, I'm baptized, but this is such it's my story, and she wanted to be baptized again. So I had a chance to baptize her again, and so it was so cool that we had someone come through the front door of online church, and she's now gathering in her home with, friends and neighbors. And that's just a cool little story of how our ministry really works. So
Sure. That's
yeah.
awesome. And so and Kevin, a lot of the listeners out there, man, they are starting this church online.
Mm,
Maybe they're toying with, they're asking questions,
yeah,
and like the story you just said there
yeah,
is so powerful in the fact
mm,
that it reflects an individual.
yeah,
Like Connie is a real life person
yeah,
who was impacted
yeah,
by church through
totally,
Saddleback Church Online, and
yeah,
as a result of that, and Saddleback providing
mm,
online discipleship opportunities for her to grow deeper in her faith and to strengthen
mm-hmm,
what she believes. She got to
mm-hmm,
the place where she not only wanted to do physical, or
yeah,
excuse me, not only doing virtual, but
online,
eventually even going to online, but to do
totally,
a house, a home group,
yeah,
where now
yeah,
she's impacting people within her physical community and
yeah,
bringing in, and that story, just the angle of, would you baptize me again? Like
yeah,
it's so important to who she is. And so,
mm,
churches that are out there that are just starting out, like,
mm,
don't forget the stories,
yes,
don't forget the
yeah,
people. Kevin, how many times have you told that story?
man, since that happened, probably 6 or 7, 8 times.
Yeah.
Yeah,
When you get the wins, church online people,
yeah,
tell everybody and their mother.
yeah,
Text
yeah, for
whoever,
sure.
put it on social media,
Yeah,
like, get it out there. Because
yeah,
what you, and people who don't agree with church online or think church online's
yeah,
wrong, they can have that opinion, but
yeah,
they can't argue a story. Like,
yeah,
somebody cannot
for
argue
sure.
against whether or not Connie's life was changed as a result
Mm,
of church online.
yeah, for sure.
And so don't lose the individual aspect of that. Celebrate
Yeah,
the individual aspect of it.
yeah, for
And,
sure. I
and
just
when
want
you're
to,
discouraged, hang on
hmm
to the
for
stories
sure.
like Connie's.
Yeah,
That's so good.
I just want to encourage the listeners, if they're, at, if they're at a point where they're kind of considering to start it or not, man, there are so many stories that God's brewing um, when you start it, that you'll see so many stories of life transformation and life impact through this ministry.
Amen.
Mm.
Awesome. We're not done. I felt like that was a great place to land the plane, but I got more questions. So remember, so what we're talking about here is challenges that people have against church online. And so, church
Yeah.
online can't have biblical community. Forget about it.
Mm,
Like, and
mm,
Connie's a prime example of
mm.
how, and utilizing online to offline. We talked about that. Connie grew in her
Yeah.
faith online, then eventually the gospel impacted her offline world when she created her own
Hmm.
home group. I mean, that's like
Yeah,
the prime example of how
for
online to
sure.
offline works. You don't know
Yeah.
what online to offline is? Check the show notes. We'll link, and there's plenty of resources out
Hmm.
there for that. But one of the other challenges, that I hear about, and to me
Yeah.
this is funny, but I understand. Well, it's yes, it's biblical, but
Hmm.
it's how this plays out kind of in the church world is biblical ordinances, things like baptisms, things like communion,
Hmm.
some of these items. And being a former online pastor, I've heard these stories all the time or the challenges of how do you do communion online? You
Yeah.
can't do communion. You can't
Yeah.
baptize somebody through a computer. Like,
Yeah.
and so it can't be church because you're not able to do this.
Yeah.
Once it's funny, the first couple of times
Mm.
I kind of like got angry, and so
Yeah.
it's confession's good for the soul,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so when the challenges come up on me, I am a type A
Uh-huh.
type person, and so if
Mm.
somebody steps up, I'm going to step up too.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how when you really listen to the questions about
Mm.
what they're questioning and how they're wrestling with these things, and now,
Hmm.
okay, so if you were trying to like lead a discipleship movement online and
Yeah.
communion was important, ask the
Hmm.
person, how would
Yeah.
you do communion, and get them
Mm.
just even start to
That's good.
wrestle with what it looks like, kind of flip the coin
Hmm.
a little bit on them.
Hmm.
But in your context, Kevin, and I love some of the
Yeah.
stuff that Saddleback's doing on this,
Hmm.
especially as you're looking at doing the the home groups, the micro locations that you guys are
Exactly.
starting to grow into,
Mm-hmm.
like, or just in general, somebody watching a service, how do you
Yeah.
do communion? How do you do baptism?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And that is a question that we get asked often, even in the midst of our staff. Say, hey, so I know you guys do baptism and communion. Do you guys baptize people online, like virtually? So we get that questions a lot. So the short answer for that is no, we don't do baptism virtually. But we
Although,
do.
how funny talking about your guy with the gym. Get an
Yeah.
iPhone that's waterproof, like have it first. Like, no, I'm totally kidding. Don't do that. Sorry to interrupt, Kevin. Please keep going.
No problem. No problem. So we're all about just decentralizing and empowering people to become the person who can baptize another person. So what we do is, so I'll just talk about baptism first. For baptism, because we have small groups literally all around the world, and there are people who wants to make the decision uh, of being baptized. So whenever we get those requests, we just go through some of the basic trainings. And like I said in the introduction, we try to look at the Bible and just draw out the essence of these ordinances. What does baptism mean essentially in the biblical times, and for what Jesus says and what Paul says in First Corinthians. Sorry, that's communion, but what Gospels says about baptism. So we go through basic definitions of baptism, and something that we really stress on regarding baptism is your outward expression of your inward decision. And baptism doesn't save you, but it means that you are already saved. So we go at the heart of that person's decision of putting their faith in Jesus Christ. And as long as we confirm that, we want to have you be baptized. So we would get on a three-way call with someone who's already been baptized by immersion. And then we would go through this training together and say, hey, so-and-so is interested in being baptized, and we noticed that she lives by you, and we would love if you could baptize her. And we go through the definition of what baptism is, and just like we're going through it right now, and then we just go through some logistics. Say, hey, let's pick a location like a lake or pool or beach where you can be completely under the water, and baptize you if baptize one person at a time. If there's couples, you would want to baptize one person first, because we want to make this an individual event, and just have people around that person who's been a part of her faith journey. So because this is a celebration, so we would go through these logistics and of how you can, do baptism in their area. So we do all of the trainings virtually like this on a Zoom call or on an audio call, and we answer all the questions, and we just release them. Hey, you're free to baptize, and just pick a location and a date, and go ahead and baptize that person. So that's how baptism works for us.
I love this, and one of the things, and you flew by it real fast, but what it is it's decentralizing the ministry in
Totally.
context, and so if you're serious about church online, you got to look at that phrase of decentralizing, because in the reality is, and we talked about this with Jay back in episode 3, is church online as it grows will quickly outscale what you're able to do organizationally, and I think Jay was mentioning that right now there's like 50 people on a waiting list to get baptized. And so if it's, and he was talking about if it's waiting for Saddleback staff to fly out there, so that's a lot of expense back and forth to do that. But what I love about this is we're decentralizing the ministry away from church leaders, church staff, paid pastor professional, and realizing, hey, the same gospel works for the people as it does for the pastor. The same Holy Spirit that's in the pastor is in the people. So let's train the people to do this, to be
Yeah,
the
for
pastors,
sure.
be the shepherds,
Yeah.
to be able to spiritually lead in those situations.
Yeah.
And so you're empowering not the pastor to be the hero coming in, but you're empowering, the people to be the hero and leading in that situation. So
Yeah.
I love the fact of decentralizing, and we've got some other resources and stuff we talked about. We'll put it in the
Yeah.
show notes, but
Yeah.
decentralizing it is a great way to
For sure.
empower and spread the reach of your ministry beyond just the circle of influence of where your physical church is.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
So we've talked about baptism.
Hmm.
Some of the trainings in that, and
Yeah.
what does communion look like? How have you been kind of creative in that space, or what is Saddleback doing to handle communion online?
Yeah, communion, we take the same approach of, hey, what does communion look like in the New Testament? And we basically look at Matthew 26, where Jesus does the communion with his disciples, and the First Corinthians, where Paul addresses the Corinthians about the communion. And we just realized that it's something that you do with your community to give thanks and to remember what Jesus has done in their lives. And we just realized that this doesn't have to be in the physical building of the church, right? Because it doesn't say anything about the physical space. It just says, hey, do this in remembrance of Jesus Christ and what he has done on the cross. And there are elements that are involved that symbolizes Jesus's body and Jesus's blood. And we just wanted to say, hey, this is what communion is. It's meant to be done in community with believers. Real time, we just add that because we want to have some people in the same virtual place at the same time. And we say this is something that you do to give thanks and to remember what Jesus has done in your life. So it's got to be for believers. If you're not a believer yet, we just want you to actually watch and see what we do to give thanks to our Lord. So we just thought those are the essence of what communion is. And we just said, hey, just like baptism, we want to empower you to do communion in your small groups. And so for some people, that would be home groups. So I think you can just kind of imagine what could happen in the home group space, because they can get the elements, prepare elements, and they read the verse, First Corinthians verse, and then they take a time to thank God for the forgiveness that they received, and then they take the elements, and then just they share about what that means for one another. For online groups, it takes a little bit more effort, but it's not something that's unnatural, because we can just come together like you and I are coming together in this virtual space, which everybody's now acknowledging as a real legitimate space. We come in a real time, and then we prepare elements individually. So you, Jeff, you would prepare the elements, just bread and juice, and I would do the same and go through the same thing. There will be a host or facilitator of communion saying, hey, this is what communion means, and this is where it comes out in the Bible. And for what Jesus has done, let's take a time to give thanks to Jesus individually and take the elements and share in a conversation. So that would be what communion looks like on an online small group.
So you guys, I mean, there's so much there, but in context of communion, you guys do communion more in the group environment online than you do in a church service environment.
You know, we used to do it in a church environment where we said, hey, because we do communions, and we broadcast that whenever we do it at our physical campus. And we say, hey, we're doing communion this weekend, so why don't you watch and do it with us but we just thought, Jay and I thought, hey, we are all about decentralizing and empowering believers to do to these ordinances. Why don't we do a training? So we did a training last week, and we're basically launching this idea of, hey, you can do it with your small group whenever you want to remember what Jesus has done in your life. So we're still doing the online service and inviting people to do it with us in the online service. But hey, you could do it with your small group whenever you want.
Where more intimate, more familial. Yeah, there's a lot of good there. I hadn't flipped that switch in my head, but that's really a good idea. Still do communion in context of the entire church when you're gathering together as a whole body, even doing online, at the same time as an former online pastor. Like I've done that, and I've gone through those experiences. But there's something intimate about doing it, in the small, 6 people, 8 people, 10 people that you know, get the elements together and do it either in a home group or, virtually through like a Zoom thing, and everybody bring in their own, bread and juice or whatever the representation of that is. Man, that's awesome. But by doing these things, right, we start to chisel away at some of these perceptions of, well, we can't be church online because we're not doing, you can't baptize somebody, you can't do communion. Well, no, you can. It looks different. Arguably, if you really look at some of the context, and to your point, biblically, there are times where church online actually looks more like the biblical model of the church than the physical church is. But
totally.
But the coexistence of online and physical, like I think they both work together well. And so, man, you've told some great stories and some great examples. I will not forget Connie's story for a long time. Hey, we're going to link to the trainings that he had talked about. I think they're on YouTube, right?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yeah.
So we'll link to it in the show notes, and you can have it there, so it's nice and easy and clean for you. Hey, just as we're wrapping up, we got maybe 5 more minutes, but like what's another challenge out there that you've heard? I'm just curious, because this might, Kevin, this might be the thing that'll see the next or another episode soon. What's another challenge that you've heard? Hey, you can't be church because blah blah blah.
I think what I realize is everybody has different definition of community. And I think that the aspect of community is actually being developed as the technology is changing the world. So I used to think, I was raised up in a very conservative church where, hey, community can only happen in a church. Like you're part of a church family if you're inside of a church and you meet the other person inside your worship center. And so that has been, my definition of community. But I realized that there's community outside of church, in my school and in my, there's people that I met outside the church that I still do life with. And that's also my community. So that kind of broke out the definition that I was given when I was being raised up in a church. And I realized through the stories like the working out at the fitness, and through the stories of Slack, and the story of the Slack group was told by someone as a vice president of a very well-known company. And just to see that happen for someone who's very successful, it just began to break down what community actually means. So the challenge that I get, the question that I get was, hey, can you call a virtual community real community? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, and I think the people outside of the church answer this question for us because they're already doing community virtually, and through the things like Skype and Slack, they're already doing it. And let me tell you something that I learned. I use Zoom mainly for our video calls, and I was trying to have a way to subgroup, and subgroup we can talk about later, but it's a way to, when in a home group, we wanted to put kind of divide the group into, men and women so that we can talk about things in a more intimate ways. And I was, thinking of ways how we can do subgrouping online. And I was just talking to my volunteers, and he, one of my volunteers uses Zoom, and he actually told me a way to do, subgroups by using the breakout function in Zoom. And Zoom has just developed this, and
Yeah.
my volunteer told me about this. So what I realized was, hey, there are people in my community that are already using this at work, and they're giving me solutions to my questions and my challenges of how can we create authentic, real community, and they're already putting the answers out there for us. So there are a lot of questions, but man, with the effort of our community, I feel like we're making progress.
That's awesome. Yeah, the breakout rooms are very cool. That is a relatively
Mm-hmm.
new feature. But,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that I love about this is your volunteers, your leaders, the people that are involved within your online community
Mm-hmm.
care enough about it to like
Mm-hmm.
dig in and explore and to learn what's out there. And I often found for myself that they were, and I'm an aggressive, innovative type of guy, but they were often people that were leading me and saying, "Hey, have you seen this? Have you tried this? Have you thought of this?" And so like they were aggressive as well in trying to figure out how best to use the technology for it to solve a lot of these problems, and to try to help proclaim and to get church online the
Mm-hmm.
exposure that it needs. Well, I tell you what, Kevin, man, this has been a great conversation. We're gonna have to do it again because I feel like we barely scratched the surface of a much deeper thing. But I love what you're doing and what Jay and combination are doing out there to kind of push the limits of community in
Yeah.
context of online. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not enough just to do the broadcast of service, but to work and to focus on creating that community piece that's so essential
Mm-hmm.
if we are really going to call church online a
Mm-hmm.
church that functions in
Mm-hmm.
online space. The best thing you said, and if I want to sum it up just in this one statement, at least of what I heard today,
Yeah.
church, don't become a bottleneck.
Mm.
Uh, Release some of the power that we would normally say, oh, that's something that church has to do, or let's get a pastor to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put them on a list and we'll figure out how. Release that power and let and train volunteers, train people to do
Yeah.
those things. Train them how to do the baptisms, how to do the communion.
Mm.
And you'll see the ministry expand and grow because you're no longer the lid, you're no longer the bottleneck. It's much larger than that. So
Mm.
decentralize that and empower people out there to become the spiritual leaders really that God empowered them to be. So Kevin, thank you very much
Mm-hmm.
for joining us today. This has been
Yes.
awesome. Any 20 seconds, any closing thoughts before you go?
Yeah, what online church has allowed me to do was, by thinking um, what could be, it actually helped me to go deeper into the Bible and see the essence of what Christianity is. So I want to invite the listeners to get into this to development so that you can continue to see what Christianity really is.
That's awesome. There's so much to that of digging into it. I mean, I've often thought about doing an online Bible study just for like online pastors and some of us that are out there, and just unpacking that because there's so much richness in the Bible towards what church really is that defines church online,
Mm.
but doesn't necessarily match what the typical American church model has become. Not slamming the model, just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always match up. So yeah, I would love that. If you're interested in that, hit me up on social media. Kevin, where can people find you on social media just as we close?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram as Kevin Che Huan Lee, and I'll tell you what Che Huan That's my Korean name, but you can maybe link that on show notes.
Yeah, we'll put that on the show notes, and that'll be great. I'm Deer Edge on all the networks. And
Mm-hmm.
hey, Kevin, it has been a pleasure to hang out with you. This has been great. Thank you for your time and your insight. Listeners, glad you could join in and be part of this. Once again, next up, episode 8, we've got Ben Stapley coming up, talking about communicating in context of church online. It's going to be a great episode. You don't want to miss it. For Kevin, my name is Jeff. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you next time on the Church Digital Podcast. Y'all have a good day.